सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
For a couple of years now, we've seen a convergence of interest on the part of many countries, generally led by, this group is led by the US, but many countries sort of coalescing together in many ways, in military ways, non-military ways, economic ways, philosophical, political, diplomatic ways, basically tied or glued together by their fear of China or by their concerns about China. In our own facetious way, we've coined the term Chin Pidit Samaj, right? These are countries which have grievances with China, fears about China. So what are the Chinese doing? We talk about the Chinese building more military. Our Navy chief just the other day at Vivekananda Foundation gave a speech where he said that in the last 10 years, China has added 148 new ships to its Navy. That's as much as the entire size of the Indian Navy. So we look at that. The latest American report on China, the intelligence community assessment and the China section said that China is now going to greatly increase the size of its nuclear arsenal, maybe double it, maybe triple it, have missiles and have weapons of longer range, greater accuracy, etc., more difficult to intercept. So all that stuff is going on. But alongside, the Chinese have unleashed something else. And that new weaponry or new arsenal, quote unquote, they've unleashed is that of peacemaking, right? And what are the Chinese saying? Chinese have unleashed something called Global Security Initiative, GSI. This is something that Xi Jinping had mentioned last year at Boao Forum for Asia conference. That was on 21st April 2022. Then in the winter of last year, 2022, the Chinese released a white paper on this. This was their plan for peace in the whole world. How we can create a perfect, peaceable, peaceful world without actually becoming the policeman of the world. Because becoming the policeman of the world would mean sending our troops elsewhere, as the Americans have been doing, fighting dirty wars in the Middle East and Afghanistan, places like that. The Chinese have tried to position themselves as the global force for good in a manner, method and approach completely the opposite of the Americans. So the Chinese proposition is, here you are, the rest of the world, you choose between the arsonist, that is the US, and the fire truck, the fire brigade, which is us, the virtuous Chinese, right? That is the proposition that is putting forward to the world. Now, we've seen in one case, this has succeeded. That's been very successful. That was the thaw between Iran and Saudi Arabia. For many years now, the two countries were not at war, but they were in a state of conflict ideologically, politically, diplomatically, economically, not militarily. Although the Saudis would say, or the Gulf countries would say, that some of the attacks they've seen from the side of Yemen would not have happened but for Iranian help, instigation, not just instigation, but active help. Iran has also had some issues. So that's been a very fraught relationship. Now, for the Chinese to be able to broker a peace of some sort, it's not as if all differences between the two nations have disappeared. It's like saying that with one intervention, with the signing of one document restoring diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, all ideological, sectarian, spiritual and theological differences between Shias and Sunnis have vanished. That doesn't happen because those differences existed and persisted even in the decades when Saudi Arabia and Iran had diplomatic relations and going back a millennia plus in history. So that's a different matter. But the fact is that these two countries, which were barely talking to each other, came together and established diplomatic relations with each other. See the knock-on effect does it have. What is it telling people in the Middle East? It's telling people in the Middle East that, look, the Americans come in here because they are involved in conflicts. They are partisans. Because they are partisans in your region, in the conflicts of your region, they take sides with some people who become enemies with the other. So conflicts happen on the ground And those conflicts, the Americans then finance and also arm. That's why they came to Iraq. That's what they've been doing in Israel with Palestinians. That's what they try to do in Libya, Syria, etc., etc., etc. But look at us, nice guys. Us as in the Chinese in this case. Look at us, Chinese, the nice guys. We've never done any such thing. If anything, we have tried to bring about peace in this area. Of course, the Americans could counter that by saying, but look, who brought in the Abraham Accords? The oldest dispute in the Middle East, or oldest dispute between the Islamic world and say the Western world, right? Israel is not exactly a Western country, but the Western world, because the whole issue of a Zionist republic, the whole issue of the safety of Jews, etc., is very much a Western concern, a key central Western concern. So if this was the longest lasting dispute between the Islamic world and the Western world and the Jewish world, we've settled it more or less by getting the key Gulf Arab countries to sign this accord with Israel, whereby both have recognized each other and now have fully normal relations. Could the Chinese have done it? So it's a competitive thing. It's not as if one has won or the other has lost. But the fact is that if the Americans succeeded with Abraham Accords, they failed with a few things. The Chinese have now thrown their hat in the ring. The Chinese are saying, we are also in this game with you. You are a big power. You can make war. You can also make peace. We can also make war, but we can also make peace. We fought a war with you in Korea, where while we were an impoverished nation, we nearly fought you to a standstill, right? So we can fight a war. We have fought wars elsewhere. We have also helped other people fight their wars, but at the same time, we can make peace better than you can make peace, right? So they are offering a new proposition for the rest of the world. This is competition for diplomatic, political, ideological influence in the world. And that's where Xi Jinping is now projecting himself as a global statesman, at least of the same stature as the President of America, if not higher. The difference, of course, being that given the way Xi Jinping is going, he's already seen through the tenures of 3 American presidents, right? He might last a couple more for all we know. That said, what is the latest that he's doing? The latest he's doing is he's now going for a summit with Putin. He's going for a summit with Putin, and the whole world knows that nobody has more influence with Putin than Xi Jinping does. Because the Russian economy depends so much on the Chinese, that's one. But more than that, China is the most powerful nation in the world, which is still not opposed to Russia. It has not condemned Russian invasion. It's also given Russia a lot of implicit diplomatic and political support. Of course, the Americans and NATO keep on suggesting or insinuating that it's a matter of time before China starts providing lethal aid or armament aid or at least ammunition resupplies to the Russians. It hasn't yet happened, but you know what? If it does happen, then this war could become an interminable war, because as long as more ammunition is coming in, Russians could go on fighting for a much longer period. But the Chinese haven't done it. Yet the Chinese know that they have leverage over the Russians. Xi Jinping has leverage over Putin. So remember, Putin only went into Ukraine after that summit meeting with Xi Jinping during the Winter Olympics in China in 2021, where the statement issued after the summit said that the two countries had a relationship with no limits. After that, he invaded Ukraine. So all of that tells you that there is leverage there that Xi Jinping has, which he can now use to try and say, look, I didn't cause this war. I did not fuel this war, right? NATO caused this war by pressing Russia, by making Russians insecure, right? Whereas the Russians needed reassurance, NATO actually made them insecure, and then they fueled this war by giving all these armaments to Ukraine. Now they are escalating it further by giving them tanks and who knows tomorrow, fighter planes. We've done nothing of the sort. So all this while, Zelensky has also asked for talks with Xi Jinping, something that Xi Jinping has not really encouraged. But now, after a summit with Putin, he's also going to have a summit with Zelensky, although this will be a virtual summit. So once again, the Chinese have a proposal on the table. They've already proposed a 12-point plan to bring about peace in Ukraine. Now, a lot of the points there, I will share a link with you. I will not go over it in this conversation. You can see it. It's very much like any other of these diplomatic documents filled with platitudes, right? You can cut all the platitudes out. That basically what it says is that grow trust, whereas step by step the two sides can de-escalate fully to the extent that there is a total ceasefire. Now, the Ukrainians initially had rejected this, saying that, look, we cannot do any talks unless these talks include on the agenda, as the center point of the agenda, the fact that the Russians must withdraw to the borders, to their borders, as defined in 1991, when the new republics were created out of the old Soviet Union. There is no such commitment in these points. Also, Xi Jinping, while he's presented this 12-point agenda, this has no condemnation, no criticism, no questioning of Russian invasion. It's all about how to settle the Ukrainian dispute politically and peacefully. But then as events have rolled out and this war has gone on, Ukraine has also shifted its position a little bit. Ukraine has now shown some willingness to talk by saying there are many aspects on which we could talk. Now, there are two interpretations there. One could be that Ukraine really wants peace. Now, if there is an honest broker who can bring about peace, who can put pressure on Putin and end this war reasonably on our terms, why don't we take it? But the second view on this is that the Ukrainians also want to keep Xi Jinping in good humor, because if they annoy him too much, or if they annoy China too much, or if they reject China's overtures, peace overtures, completely out of hand, that might give China and Xi Jinping the justification to start giving some kind of lethal weaponry, or if not weaponry, at least ammunition supplies to Russia. So it's important to keep Xi Jinping engaged. So once again, what is the conclusion of this? The conclusion of this is that China and Xi Jinping now have leverage with Putin, but also with Zelensky. They are now unleashing or unveiling this peace offensive there. That will be their second after the Saudi-Iran rapprochement. Now, as we had mentioned earlier, after Xi Jinping made that speech on 21st April 2022 at Boao Forum for Asia Conference, after that is where he mentioned Global Security Initiative, but no details were given out. Later in November, the Chinese government issued a white paper on this, on what Global Security Initiative is this. Because even if you see that 12-point peace plan on Ukraine, it draws from this, right? So you can read one document first or the second document first, or you can read both of them. If you want more details, that's up to you. I will share both documents with you. So there is a para from this document, and you can see more discussion on this in an article or in his weekly newsletter that Adil Brar, who's a China expert, currently studying in Taipei, he's written for us. So I will share a link of Adil's newsletter also with you. Track his work on China on The Print. He writes 2 columns a week. This is excellent stuff if you want to understand China better. And even speaking for myself, while preparing for this episode of Cut the Clutter, I have drawn a lot of wisdom from Adil Brar's writings, at which point I refer to a passage in the white paper, again full of platitudes. So basically, in this key passage, the white paper says or claims or promises that they are going to address the root causes of global conflicts, improve global security, governance, encourage joint international efforts to bring more stability and certainty to a volatile and charged up era, and promote durable peace and development in the world. So sounds like one of those essays that a senior school kid has written at his or her model UN conference, right? But a lot of these diplomatic peacemaking documents are written like that. All men and women must have good moral character, as good as we do as peacemakers. That is what the Chinese are trying to say. Now, Saudi-Iran, after the peacemaking happened, after the joint statement was issued and after the two countries decided to restore diplomatic relations, mark what Wang Yi said. Wang Yi is the former foreign minister and currently the chairman of the Chinese Foreign Affairs Commission. He said, and I quote from him, that this has become a successful example for the strong implementation of GSI. So that was seen as a success of GSI. Now they are planning or hoping to get a second success. And that second success they're aiming for is in Ukraine. So Middle East GSI white paper also talks about setting up a Middle East security forum where all countries can come and talk about their issues. Can the Americans do such a thing? Americans are caught up in such a partisan situation. That will be the message that they can do it. They cannot do it. They still have boots on the ground in the Middle East. We have no boots on the ground. In any case, we don't want to become policemen of the world, because that means sending troops away from our shores, and we are not going to do that. Let the Americans do that. So they are projecting themselves as everything that America isn't and as nothing that America is. Again, if I quote from the white paper, it says, and I quote, major countries shoulder particularly important responsibilities of maintaining international peace and security. We call on major countries to lead by example in honoring equality, good faith, cooperation and rule of law, and in complying with UN Charter and international law. Again, very platitudinous. So if I'm allowed to slip in just a little bit of opinion or maybe even a little taunt, I might add, okay ji, Xi Jinping ji, तो पहले आप ये करें, do this first and persuade your friend Putin to follow your advice here and start by getting Putin to follow the UN Charter and international law. Nevertheless, that was just my little bhadas. I've taken it out. The fact is Beijing has leverage. Now, if you look at Riyadh, if you look at Saudi Arabia, China is Saudi Arabia's biggest trading partner, not America. $87 billion a year, right? So the Americans right now must be looking askance at Saudi Arabia that, look, you were our allies all this while and now you're doing this stuff with China and you are participating in a China brokered peace deal with Iran, which happens to be our arch enemy. Right? So there it works sort of contrary to America's interest. So the Americans actually have seen one of their key stalwart allies go the other way. Or in fact, one of their key stalwart allies in the Middle East now openly flirting and more than flirting with their arch adversary right now today and in the decades going ahead. So for America, this is more a situation of if they were to sing to Saudi Arabia, तुम अगर मुझको ना चाहो तो कोई बात नहीं, तुम किसी और को चाहोगे तो मुश्किल होगी, right? So that is what is happening in that situation. America also has some limitations because Israel plays big time in American politics. Israel and Iran have a completely broken relationship. They are enemies. Israel is an important foreign policy and economic partner of China. Israel and China have a very good relationship, but Israel does not play at all in Chinese internal politics. Besides the fact that China does not have any internal politics, but Israel is not an issue there at all. This is where Xi Jinping thinks that he has an opportunity of playing the peacemaker versus the Americans who are the weapon supplier. So this is the peacemaker versus the weapon supplier, or the fire truck or the fire brigade versus the arsonist. So that is the new offensive that has now broken out from Beijing. You can call it the peace offensive, you can put it in quotes, you can qualify it, you can put it in italics, but the Chinese now using peacemaking, their leverage and their ability and their success in making this thaw and bringing about this thaw between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and the initiative now on Russia and Ukraine to say that, look, we are a global statesman, we can make peace where others make war. And yet again, a message to the Americans that, look, we don't have that much problem between ourselves, right? Our problems are only in Western Pacific and South China Sea. We can resolve those. Beyond that, we have no problem in the world. Once again, will the Americans buy it? Your guess is as good as mine. Obviously, they will not buy it. Will India buy it? Obviously, they will not buy it. None of the countries who right now fear China or who worry about China or who see China as an adversary will be impressed. But they are not the ones that Chinese are trying to impress in this case. They are trying to impress the rest of the world, which is a lot of the world.